provide an update on Atlanta's Freedom Park Master Plan. And during the meeting, we'll have a very exciting portion in the middle where we will actually provide a design tour of newly envisioned Freedom Park. And we'll conclude the meeting with talking about next steps. But first, what we want to start with is provide an update on public consultation. Currently, we're about 3/4 through the process. Here during the final public meeting, this is our last chance to meet as a, in the public forum, but it won't be over this meeting. We'll still have materials posted on the website between early January and early February for you to comment on. And the important update we wanted to give you today is that over the past month, since our last public meeting, we've conducted a series of multiple one-on-one stakeholder sessions for incredibly helpful in
Natalia, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I believe that we are not able to really hear you. The audio quality is not very good, and I think we're all having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear that? Can you hear me now, Ed?
Yes, sort of.
How about now?
Still questionable.
Can you take off the shield? Is now better?
This is much better.
Okay, great. So in providing a public consultation update, we wanted to mention specifically that we met with multiple stakeholder groups over the month of November and continuing to do so in December to make sure that our ideas vetted and endorsed by a variety of entities such as nonprofit groups, public agencies, civic entities, and neighborhoods. And in our kind of outreach efforts, we make sure to remind people of the big idea of the master plan. In our minds, Freedom Park is truly Atlanta's cultural trendset, but also not losing track of kind of small ideas that populate the geography of the plan. And we were able to do so with community help. All the notes that you see on the diagram here actually came from conversations with the community, and that starts being categorized in systematized in a kind of planning framework under different systems such as planning, mobility, ecology, program, and identity, and eventually comes together in a cohesive vision for Freedom Park over the next several decades of development. So there were two specific conversations we had during our second public meeting, and one dealt with the goals set out by the master plan. And the community had an opportunity to weigh in on which goals were specifically important to them. And what I wanted to do today is to walk you through the layers of the master plan that are emerging based on community prioritization. So the kind of our idea of creating a range of goals from local to international got reshuffled with community priorities in what you kind of going to be able to follow here in a minute. So number one layer in the master plan the community wanted to endorse was enhancing ecological regional value of the park. And everything that you see on this diagram here is illustrating how a variety of new garden environments and tree canopy is going to be augmenting the existing green fabric of Freedom Park. The second important layer that built on the green one is the mobility layer. Everything that you see here in light orange are existing pathways in the park. In darker colors, what you see is our proposed mobility improvements and enhancements to secondary path network, but also intermodal junctions within the park and making sure that safety is addressed. The third layer of the park that was incredibly important to the community was positioning the park as a unique international art space. So what you'll see over the course of our conversation today is some of the illustrations of what that means, but here is just a quick diagram that is populating the map of the park with new art installation and programming opportunities. The next layer that's really important to highlight the civic nature of the park. And by civic, when we kind of trying to tangibilize that idea on the plan, we're really talking about spaces for civic assembly. And these are the few that are highlighted on the map. And these are truly becoming heart of the community. And this is, already serving as de facto gathering places. But we really want to highlight it even further in our master plan framework. The next layer that's important is supporting adjacent neighborhood vitality. And the way we are doing so is creating conduits throughout the park, but also outside the park that kind of becoming symbiotic with community assets outside the park and inside the park. So that's supporting economic fabric of commercial centers, but also connected to other adjacencies that may be vital for communities' daily use. And last, well, it's not last one, it's almost the last one. The elevated national significance of the park as Atlanta's open space really hinges on understanding where the park actually lies first, understanding the boundaries of the park, and then building on this incredibly important geographical significance of Freedom Park, centrally located in Atlanta, and connecting and touching so many neighborhoods and stakeholders. And lastly, increasing economic viability of the park will be dependent on people understanding where the park is and establishing ownership of the park and future projects that may come online. For us, the first step in that would be really defining points of arrival into the park via gateways and legible kind of edges and general understanding where one enters and exits the park. So that was the first conversation we had. The second one, we were able to conduct an interactive exercise where we looked at a range of programming within the park. And by programming, it's a very jargony term, for planners, but it's really things to do in the park, put in simple terms. And, some of the things that you can do in the park require a lot of built-in infrastructure, and some don't. You can bring your blanket, and to have a picnic, and that requires nothing at all. Or you can have built-in playgrounds and other things that you can enjoy. So when we kind of summarize the feedback from the community on the degree of that infrastructure program, a kind of programmed nature of the park, we really got a almost 50-50 split. So a lot of, and what it told us is it's basically that people really appreciate the current passive nature of the park and its kind of bucolic healing environment in the middle of the city. At the same time, it can be quite boring on a daily basis, especially if you have a young family. So a lot of feedback we got was in enhancing what's already there and augmenting some of the, kind of potential interests that can come through education, play, and recreation. And not only did we collect information through survey, but also letting people place their ideas on the map directly into the locations where that programming may be potentially realized. And so if you look at, so by comparison, if you look at the current things to do in the park, so to speak, you see very few places that are programmed specifically for a particular activity. We have a couple of playgrounds, we have, farmers market doesn't even happen on the territory of the park. It's in, in Carter Presidential Center. So there is very few and far between things to do. So what we've done is taken ideas from the mapping exercise and the feedback that we received, the community that really wanted to focus on enhancing what's there, augmenting what's there, and focusing on kind of passive programming in the park, and created a list of opportunities throughout that can really meet that goal. Okay. Let's switch real quick.
We're going to start by zooming out for a second. Just talk about the park in general terms. We want to remind ourselves just what an incredible asset Freedom Park is to the city of Atlanta, and obviously the communities who utilize it on a daily basis. It's over 130 acres in size, stretching over 2.5 miles in length, and with a perimeter that stretches over 8 miles. The park offers an invaluable resource and reserve of open space for the city. And for the over 35,000 people, it's certainly convenient access to the miles of trails and parkland close to the heart of downtown. From its eastern tip along the banks of Lillwater Creek to the iconic downtown skyline overlook at the Jackson Street Bridge to the west, Freedom Park's green canopy and undulating topography offer an immersive network of open space stitched through some of the city's most vibrant and historical neighborhoods. Lesser known, perhaps, is that Freedom Park was born from struggle, a struggle to stop expansion of the planned state highway, slated to tear through the established urban community and stop through the grassroots efforts of neighbors, advocates, and civic leaders. Freedom Park's unique outline, crisscrossed through and between 7 of Atlanta's neighborhoods, bears the scar of the struggle and what is now linked to a network of verdant open space. But Freedom Park is more than just open space. Land and adjacent neighborhoods offer a rich cultural history that remain relevant today, not only to its immediate community, but to the city of Atlanta and the nation as a whole, really. The park sits at the edge of the subcontinental divide and was part of the setting for the Civil War's Battle of Atlanta. It sits adjacent to the homes of 2 Nobel Peace Prize recipients, Martin Luther King Jr. and Jimmy Carter, and the late Congressman John Lewis, a champion of empowering communities and a key figure in the realization of Freedom Park, is recognized through the dedication of both John Lewis Parkway and the plaza which bears his name, both within the park's boundaries. The park is also a key connector to some of the city's most important cultural and recreational assets. Connections can be found to the Atlanta Beltline, the Stone Mountain Trail, Olmsted Linear Parks, and to Fernbank Forest. The Little 5 Points, the historic Fourth Ward, and the City Market. Yes.
Hey, it's Kinder. I can see in the window behind you guys that I think you are doing a show, but I don't think we're seeing it. Are you threading through images?
Yeah.
As you talk? Yeah, we just
playing.
see the green screen of Freedom Park Tour.
Okay.
Sorry, I
that's all right.
Probably should have told you sooner. I just realized it though, seeing the.
I think you'll have to
reflection behind
switch
you guys.
the screen that you're sharing.
We have to stop share and reshare.
It's going to be beautiful though, everyone. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, basically what we're looking at here, if you can see it now, is just the aerial of Freedom Park as we move through the city. And we just wanted to show that in context with what I was just talking about. And really, at the end of the day, this master plan is about sort of leveraging all these assets and cultural narratives that I was just talking about. And there's a lot of limitations within the park. The pedestrian complex presented by the existing road network, the lack of biodiversity within its landscape, and really the lack of a singular cohesive identity for the park. There's a collection of unique stories and assets that are hidden from view and buried within sort of the cityscape that surrounds the park. So this master plan we're working on seeks to address both these fundamental design issues and uncover the untapped potential of the park. We want to address the issues of public safety, legibility, and connectivity, and elevate the experience of the park users and celebrate sort of the diverse cultural offerings that the park offers. Most importantly, the master plan seeks to reflect the insights and aspirations of you, the local community, and the Conservancy and the constituents of the park and really work to define the stewardship of the park of the coming decades. So with that, we're going to walk through the park in more detail, step by step, and I think we have to reshare the screen.
Please share it.
Okay. Can everybody see the map in front here? So here we are. This is the overall plan map that Natalia was just mentioning. This is really more or less a reflection of the input we've received thus far in the community engagement process, both through the website and stakeholder meetings, as well as the previous public presentations. So we're going to start from the east, just walk you around the park. We're going to start in this section we call the East Wing, from basically Ponce de Leon and the Lowwater Creek and Paideia School site all the way over to Moreland site. And if you zoom in a little bit, you'll see really a portion of the park that the boundary of the park is actually to the perimeter. The core of this we're showing is this is along Lowwater Creek, and this is actually a master plan for the Paideia School. Technically, this is not part of Freedom Park, but Freedom Park occupies either side of it. And the goal they have, and what we would like to sort of have the master plan recognize and sort of adopt, is this idea of engaging Lowwater Creek, and really think of it as how it can be uncover the sort of unique aspects of that typology of landscape down in this low riparian forest. There's the historic Ponce de Leon Avenue Bridge, and then really sort of work to develop the gateway experience and the legibility of the trail system as it takes you from the main road to the north through into the site and eventually over adjacent to Candler Park up to North Avenue and the connection with Mary Lynn Elementary School. So if you look at imagery, potentially could imagine that within the lowlands of the Paideia property with the stream and the sort of exhibits of native gardening, and really a focus on education and immersion in that sort of landscape. As we move further to the west, we go through the series of garden rooms, basically from Candler Park Drive through the Paideia School, through Mary Lynn Elementary School. And here we have this sloping landscape with this undulating trail that carves through that stretch of land adjacent to the school, in which we will embellish with educational landscapes focused around butterfly habitat, wildflower meadows, and so forth, and really think of ways to engage with the school and with kids and how they can interpret and be a part of this landscape. Perhaps there's a slide built along the slope that takes you down this kind of exciting transition, but within this immersive landscape. And progressing further to the west, we go through this area that's basically part of the existing sculptural sort of networks, the pieces that we have throughout the park. And really, this is more about reinforcing the rooms that sort of developed. We go by the adjacent park, Goldsboro Park, which has some basketball and tennis court pavilions or sites that don't currently have pedestrian access, so we would build access down to them and really work with this master pair with the city to enhance those offerings, but also potentially even expose some of the existing drainage and creek channels that have been channelized and sort of hidden from view into sort of more feature elements within the park. And then continuing on into the main portion of that stretch of the park, again, through some of these rooms that are more defined by vegetation and topography. So if you look at sort of a gateway experience from, this is at the intersection at the Mary Lynn Elementary School, we begin to see this wildflower meadow landscape. We begin to see this idea of creating these sort of gateway plazas and all the elements that they can embed into the project. Interpretive elements, the signage, cleaning up the signage for the project is very important. We certainly have a lot of different sort of wayfinding mechanisms. We want to streamline that. And also thinking about destinations and having signage that points you into not just what's in the park, but what also is back in the neighborhood as well.
What's important about this moment is opportunity for storytelling, and we are looking for those opportunities in the surfaces of hardscape and kind of built elements, including paving. So here, especially at the regional gateways, can become storytelling moments, very important for kids.
As we move a little bit further along into this area where we begin to see these meadowscapes through these undulating features, and we begin to see this idea of this engaging landscape where kids can begin to experience the topography in more meaningful ways, introduce educational tools, maybe this bird or animal architecture habitat pieces that are part of the educational framework of the park. And then thinking out as you move further into the park, how those experiences can be leveraged into nighttime or dusk activities. Ideas of doing things that are, we're adjacent to a lot of adjacent houses and communities, so we want to be respectful of that, and really about nature too. Yeah, we don't want to take a sensitive habitat and then flood it with nighttime light if it is not currently in sort of the programmatic idea of the park. So here's an idea of taking a piece of a pathway and maybe infusing it with bioluminescent sort of paving that absorbs the light during the day and then releases it at night in an interesting pattern. And thinking about how that can also relate to sculpture and so forth as you move through the park. And then finally, as we a little bit further east towards Moreland, we go through essentially the existing trail system and picking up on some initiatives that are already underway. There's been some drainage initiatives installed that could be enhanced into garden features, as well as larger sort of wetland areas that solve some flooding problems, but also become sort of habitat and interpretive landscapes. Of course, we have the great big lawn, the big sort of bowl of a lawn, which we think is an incredible asset for the park, just in its current state, really, and being preserved as such, with rooms and sculptural opportunities off to the perimeter of that site. And it maybe as a part of doing this, as we think about how the crossing at Moreland Avenue function, we think about developing more of a gateway to offer a little bit more streetscape presence and a gathering space, a place to navigate, sort of get your bearings, find directions and so forth at that key intersection. And maybe that leads into a secondary trail system that goes around the south side of this sort of large open lawn on the back side of the hill, so to speak. And that kind of creates these loops. These loops can be really beneficial to users who aren't always sort of walking on a long linear line, but maybe have less time to do sort of a more loop focused on, walking a certain distance or so forth. And that's a recurring theme throughout this park. We're looking for ways to separate bikes from pedestrians where opportunistically, where it makes sense to recognize that there's a speed differential, and sometimes bikes and runners need a little bit more space than, say, pedestrians. And likewise, pedestrians don't always want to feel like they're in the way of other people and have a calmer experience. That also extends into this very hot issue of the crossing at Moreland Avenue and how we address that. There's been basically two approaches that have been looked at. One is certainly at the ground level, increasing the crosswalk safety through just legibility, working with the city on the timing of the lights, perhaps making the medians a little stronger to provide better pedestrian refuge. And then there was a larger, this is actually an older proposal of putting a pedestrian bridge across the landscape there, which we recognize has developed a little bit of a controversy because of its potential visual impacts and so forth. We think by putting it on the south side, there's a nice way to integrate it with the existing topography, minimizing its presence. We think we can utilize landscaping and grading to help essentially screen much of the visual impact of that of the bridge, with the exception of where you actually drive under it on Moreland Avenue. So certainly, but there's a lot of other issues that need to be explored, certainly utilities and so forth notwithstanding. And if we look at the Freedom Lawns Common, we were just talking about this idea of these open lawns where you can picnic, where we have opportunities for sculpture and sculptural landscapes to be developed. We think about this idea of the crossing at Moreland Avenue and certainly the improved crosswalk connection, but potentially also this idea of this overhead bridge that we think should be delicate, leveraging sort of the latest structural technologies to really minimize its impact and think of it more in the context of what the park would need rather than what maybe a GDOT solution might be. And of course, here you have it, that same intersection without the bridge. So we think there's improvements in both alternatives, and they would both need to be studied.
And with additional tree plantings, we really think the bridge, if executed correctly, has the potential to become almost like a canopy walk that feeds into the narrative of nature education and kind of artistic expression in this portion of the park.
So next, we're going to move down to the south wing of the park. This is really off to Cobb Avenue and MARTA station, which we think is an incredibly important gateway to the park. And not the easiest one to navigate. You kind of, you can't really see that it's even an entry to the park. It's kind of dark and hidden. But then it opens up into one of the most important sort of portions of this portion of the park with the Poplar Circle Park, which has a historic home remnants, has a playground, and just is generally a wonderfully graded space. So we've talked with MARTA about possibly partnering with them in the future about how they can do improvements to their parking lot and how we can improve the gateway experience. Maybe there's a parking orchard that happens with that parking lot, or otherwise that parking lot becomes more efficient and opens up some more room for this sort of clear and legible gateway connection. As we move into the park more, I think the other important aspect of this is really creating a very legible and visible circulation route that takes you to sort of the heart of the space, which we think is really at the edge of the old road that defines the Poplar Circle portion. And those lines of sight are really important to increase this idea of safety. The sort of desire line paths that exist on the edge of the space could be formalized. Those are a lot of the ones that people take if they're taking a shortcut to get to Little 5 Points. And maybe there's a series of gardens that can develop along there in association with improvements to the playground. And then preservation of the really beautiful hill that occupies the south edge adjacent to the MARTA parking lot, but buffered so it really create more sense of enclosure for that roomscape. So here's the entrance as we kind of imagined it. And this is a little bit more extreme, but the idea is that we would open up the parking lot to create this direct line, this sort of passage or paseo that takes you into the park. And maybe you can go so far as to think that there's a pavilion that could be built. Certainly MARTA we'll have to work with MARTA to make sure that there's room for that. But the idea is that it's important, I think, to really play up this gateway experience, particularly in this context where we have the trains and visitors who might be coming here from out of town. This might be more of a regional sort of gateway to the park as opposed to one that just the neighbors would use.
And it has an opportunity to tell the story of the park with a lot of archival materials, potentially, can be housed in the small museum. Or even if it becomes an open air pavilion, we can think about the kind of the processional nature of this linear gateway and kind of stretching the history and the narrative of the struggle and all the events that took place over the history of this neighborhood. And here is a kind of a zoomed in example of what that might look like on the path towards the playground.
And then as you get to the playground, thinking about how a site like that can really work into some of the narratives of the park, these sort of hidden narratives. Certainly we have the presence of the old or the old steps that in this park, portion of the park that were to the old homes that used to be here before they were removed for the potential highway construction. And so the playground, maybe it takes up a narrative of that, but in sort of a positive way, more of a community-focused neighborhood accepted way, and kind of create this sort of treehouse atmosphere that really picks up also on the assets of these incredible trees that really define this whole experience as you move towards the core of the site through Inman Park all the way to the Carter Center.
Yeah, so nature becomes experienced through the lens of history, which is unique to this particular wing of the park.
As we move a little bit further south, we have the crossing at Euclid and formalizing and really creating a safe gateway crossing there. And then this portion of the park is a lot of open lawn and these large canopy trees. And here we imagine it's really a much more light touch. There may be some secondary paths or opportunities allowed to help sort of formalize and define some of these lawn spaces and really work the edge buffer conditions, but preserving the beauty of these sort of big flowing lawns and the flexibility of them for different user groups. And maybe there's an overlaying theme, like a more of a understory garden walk, if you will, that's focused more around flowering trees and or flowering edge buffer plantings that gives that really introduces or reinforces seasonality. So as you come back to this site on a daily basis or over if you're a visitor more infrequently, you see it evolve a little bit with the seasons. The next area we want to talk about is the sort of what we're calling the Freedom Park Central, or the area around the Carter Center. You see the Carter Center rendered here like the rest of the park, and that's actually not part of Freedom Park, just as a reminder to everybody. We've had close discussions with the Carter Presidential Center, and we'll continue to speak with them as the Conservancy pushes forth the agenda of the master plan. But we think this is a really important juncture within the park, certainly from a circulation standpoint, with all these wings that come together. There's a lot of vehicular conflicts as the road in different manifestations sort of creates this island that is the Carter Center. Based on the community feedback, the Carter Center is certainly a destination that we want to promote. And we sort of highlighted in orange, so these key crossing points. Those are existing key crossing points that people really just have to run across the street with no protection from vehicles. So addressing that in a very forthright way, whether it be some combination of stop signs or pedestrian activated signals, hawk signals as we call them, would be one solution that we would sort of explore in more detail with GDOT in this scenario. And then beyond that, I think just as we move around to some of the spaces, and we'll see this some of the other plans, really thinking about these secondary paths and the legibility and the clarity of them to navigate you around, really highlighting some of these larger intersections at Ralph McGill, at North Highland, and these sort of marker points where more people are entering into the park into these wayfinding moments. We also should note that they're proposing sort of a secondary path drop-in connection adjacent, just south of Ralph McGill to the Beltline, and another one on the west side of the Beltline, which we'll talk about as part of that portion of the park as well. Now, there's another alternate opportunity here, which is much more bold, and that is to consider the possibility of decommissioning. These are one-way roads that generally occupy the north and south ends of the Carter Center site, and to potentially decommission the south one, the East Freedom Parkway portion, and essentially take that traffic and move it up to the northern portion, basically as the extension of Ralph McGill. And what that does is that creates a very simple vehicular sort of legible way of navigating through the park. You come up along John Lewis Parkway and you take a right on Freedom Parkway to go west, and that takes all that land to the south and opens it up to bikes and pedestrians. That land you could utilize that existing roadway as a converted bikeway system without even having to rebuild it, with just some modifications at the interface with the road. So what that does is that opens up all sorts of opportunities for improving connectivity to the Carter Center directly on foot, as well as just generally getting some more acreage for the park as a whole. So that we think could be a really transformative opportunity, and certainly enhance the legibility and sort of establish this pedestrians and bike loop that works its way around the Carter Center. I should also note on the northern side, in both schemes, actually, we're showing a little pedestrian bridge that links up with what generally considered one of the major or the major sort of gateway into the Carter Presidential Center. And that's strategically located in this sort of deep ravine area where we have a lot of topography we can work with. So here we can kind of just a glimpse of the potential of this when you take the Freedom Park or that road away from the south side and the kind of lands that opens up and the views of downtown that could start to take into account and really sort of strengthen the dialogue between the Carter Presidential Center and Freedom Park. It offers opportunities to create new moments that offer higher elevation overlooks as you get where the existing road splits off and now becomes more of a pedestrian way. We can kind of capture some of that sort of stranded land for unique opportunities within the park. And then if we move up further to what we call the north wing of the park, from Ponce de Leon down to Freedom Parkway or Ponce Highlands, through Ponce Highlands. This site is really focused on a couple big moves, but one of them is that John Lewis Plaza certainly occupies the northern end, close to Ponce de Leon, and we think there's a real opportunity there to formalize and strengthen that plaza as in its current manifestation and create more of a civic gathering space. Perhaps we can take advantage of some of the low-lying land that's immediately adjacent to it and create a pond that sort of extends that vision of the plaza into more of a park that's all sort of dedicated to his legacy. And then working further south, think about how some of the existing playgrounds can be enhanced, and the legibility that leads to connections to the Carter Center as well as to points to the west, while preserving a lot of the trees and again, strengthening some of these sort of landscape rooms that are developed, including the ones that currently hold the existing community gardens there, but then creating potentially new ones as well. And then on the west side of that, there's basically a ravine that runs between the existing neighborhood and John Lewis Parkway. Again, extending at the northern end, extending that plaza to both sides of John Lewis Parkway as sort of a gateway, finding new opportunities potentially to create a really kind of unique trail system that dives down into this ravine landscape and creates just sort of a new kind of experience and typology that then would connect back to the neighborhood at more of a larger plaza intersection at Northern Avenue that again helps with legibility. And then as you move further south into sort of the core of Freedom Park. So here we see that in a little bit more enlargement at the northern end. There's opportunities for art and so forth. And John Lewis Parkway, which we'll talk about in a moment also, really being strengthened as a design idea through the enhancement of sort of flowering trees and other sorts of plantings that really help memorialize that road and his legacy. And if we're in John Lewis Plaza, you can see how that might start to feel with a little bit more hardscape. This pond, the bridge sculpture that was commissioned in dedication to him specifically. This idea of the pond and how the landscape around that can be very unique and really begin to highlight some of these more nuanced aspects of nature in conjunction with this more civic space. And then as you go further to the south, which we talked about with the playground and community gardens and so forth that occupy that stretch of land. And then here's the bridge, also that important point that connects this portion of the park, this north wing, to the Carter Center directly with the roadway that would be just beneath it, either in its current condition or in its future potentially expanded condition. The last segment we're going to talk about is the West Wing, and this is the area from basically Jackson, from Carter Presidential Center on the east side to the Jackson Street Bridge on the far west. And if you start over more towards the east side, again, you'll see it as the Beltline crosses through the site. We have these little plaza spaces that are developed as, we call them handshake plazas. The idea of these two parks coming together and to create a moment where that we can kind of work to strengthen both the goals of both park systems, as well as give an opportunity for legibility and what other sort of, place to air up your tires on your bike or otherwise take a break on your journeys through these incredible open space system. We have the Ice Bridge, which, undeniably occupies this incredibly visible portion of as it sits over the bridge, over the parkway itself. Maybe there's a very simple thing that could be done there in terms of branding. You could paint the surface of it. Those kind of things, we shouldn't discount the importance of those kind of things to sort of the long-term legacy or really need for the park to establish its image, and it will help in terms of building awareness, building opportunities for funding, and so forth. Maybe even in the future, you could bring people up there and create incredible views to downtown, or create an art space. A lot of things would have to be to studied as far as structural limitations and so forth. But probably more importantly, along John Lewis Parkway, we're showing these additional connections of the trail systems that sort of exist in pieces along both the north and the south sides of John Lewis Parkway, and extending them down to the Beltline connections to those two handshake plazas on either side of the Ice Bridge location. And as you move a little bit further to the west, we have the existing pedestrian bridge, which the spaces around get highlighted so it's less it actually connects better with these existing trail systems. You can see the planting being enhanced along John Lewis Parkway, and then the important juncture at Randolph and Highland Avenue. So here we see the sort of handshake plaza and some of the opportunities with the Ice Bridge in the distance on the hill. Perhaps the side panels of that become art opportunities, branding opportunities for the park, but really just kind of creating a nice social gathering space at that juncture. And at the intersection of Randolph and Highland, thinking about how we can capture some additional space that really elevates the significance of this and uncover some of the assets we have. We have the 54-column sculpture that's sort of tucked away a little bit out of view right now, and how we can open up that and create a little bit more of a formal plaza-like gateway or pedestrian accessible gateway into that space. Thinking about how the art, which is a big part of this community and these portions of the community, is integrated and really celebrated, and maybe finds its way into things like crosswalks and so forth, and how we can build a little, takes a portion of the bridge and actually build it out over to create some more space, a belvedere, if you will, or an overlook area. So you have views down onto Freedom Parkway, John Lewis Plaza. Maybe that's a place to see parades if such types of activities happen, and generally just increase the sort of privileged pedestrian spaces along that portion of the park. And of course, John Lewis Parkway itself, with the planting of flowering trees on the perimeter. We've actually been talking with Georgia Department of Transportation, and they have a project plan for a portion of the median that's actually a pretty thorough and detailed planting, also in commemoration of John Lewis, that would be incorporated into that as well. And then finally, on the far west wing of the project here, you can see in the middle in that median, that GDOT planting area I was just talking about. But there's a lot of other really interesting opportunities that present themselves at this end of the park. We have the existing dog park on the north side, and at the intersection, this really busy intersection that's not terribly friendly to pedestrians and bikes right now at Boulevard and John Lewis Parkway, thinking about how we can capture some more space so people can stage themselves, bikes and pedestrians, get orientation, and generally form a gateway to the park, because a lot of cars are coming into this for the first time if they're coming from the west. But also thinking about how people would cross the street between all these different sort of assets we have. We've got this mixed-use development next to the southeast corner of Boulevard. We have higher density residential on the opposite corner. We have the dog park to the northeast corner, having a direct stair down into that dog park from the Boulevard intersection, and an accessible entrance as well from Boulevard would really help to activate that space as well. And then as we move further to the west, there's a small street there just south of John Lewis Parkway that really actually serves as the gateway point to, or one of the gateway points to the King Center and the historic core of the Old Fourth Ward neighborhood. We think there's a great opportunity to reconsider how that street operates, certainly open to cars, but maybe have the flexibility to close it down for events, given that it's relatively minor street from a circulation standpoint. And thinking about how we can create a flexible space that really encourages that sort of community gatherings and activities. And then certainly, of course, the Jackson Street Bridge, the city actually is already looking at plans to adjust the traffic lanes and bike lanes to help get a little bit more space for pedestrians to gather on the west side of the bridge, where it's the great selfie moment. We can capture the view of the downtown skyline, but do so in a way that's much safer than its current condition allows for. And then I failed to point out another really exciting piece, which is right at the intersection, right at the mid-block of John Wesley Dobbs Avenue. There's sort of a parcel of land right there, and if you went there today, you'd see this beautiful sculpture that's been built. And we think there's a nice opportunity for another sort of gateway moment from the community from the south, but also kind of its own little park that is immediately adjacent to the school, for the Howard Middle School to the southeast of that. So it's kind of catty corner. It's a great place where kids could wait to be picked up even, or it could be used as a place for even school classes to come out and have events, educational or otherwise, in a very flexible sort of garden space. So here's an image of what that might kind of be, where it's functioning as a trail connection to Freedom Park Trail, which is just in the background of the image, but also could create some opportunities for seating that's kind of playful and maybe very solid and durable, so that young kids can feel like they can jump around and really kind of get that middle school energy out in a way that's respectful and also serves multiple needs as well. And then thinking about what we were talking about before, we gave a lot of these spaces proper names, which of course would be the job of others over time. But but for purposes of the master plan, thinking of the street and maybe thinking of it as, King Square or something to that effect, and maybe the paving gets reconsidered. So it really, again, picks up a little bit of the history of the neighborhood, but also really privileges pedestrians and really focuses its attention on what it can be when during special events. It's also a nice gateway moment where you can get oriented into the park or oriented to your journey down to the King Center. And again, all these neighborhood loops that Natalia mentioned are extremely important. And so these gateways and navigation work in both directions. And then thinking about how that could be transformative at night or for small events or maybe even large events, depending if the city would allow. So this is all sort of part of that component to it. And then finally, the Jackson Street Bridge with the city's improvements. You can see the King Plaza, as we mentioned it, off to the left side of the screen, and the plantings along John Lewis Parkway. And thinking about how that pedestrian bridge, that bridge, the vehicular bridge, could have a improved pedestrian experience that really offers these incredible views to downtown and really formalizes this iconic moment within the city of Atlanta.
Okay, well, thanks, Scott, that was great. Well, speaking about next steps, if you want to. So let's look at this for a minute. The next phase of the master plan process will address prioritization of projects. As you could see, the vision that we've shared is pretty holistic, it's long-term, it's idealized, and it will take, many years to complete, to the full picture that you see on the map. So what we're looking at really is dozens of transformative projects that amount the master plan as a whole, and those projects are both big and small. Sometimes it takes a small project, to kind of become this wormhole transformative trail that connects the two neighborhoods together, and it's pretty simple. Sometimes it's a big transformative vision for Lake Lewis and John Lewis Civic Plaza. And to us, they are not, kind of mutually exclusive. I mean, they can all happen at the same time. They can be staged and sequenced in a variety of ways. And the ways that we are thinking that can potentially be sequenced is opportunistic. A lot of these projects are, what we call have potential for implementation just based on the timing, based on potential partnerships, funding structures in place. So we'll study that over the next month, but also we'll rely on you, the community, to give us feedback, which one of these projects that you really feel strongly about. Between the month of January and February, we'll be posting materials on the website that the community as a whole will be able to kind of vote on top 3 or top 5 projects that are kind of emerging as priorities for the community out of the master plan. And that will help us kind of reshuffle this list of priority projects that we are currently considering. And so with that, I think we'll give great tools to the Conservancy to go forward in terms of fundraising and establishing those needed partnerships for implementation. Okay, I think, Ed, I will hand it over to you at this point.
Sure, thank you, Scott and Natalia. I am posting the link to said website where all these materials will be available, and it's on the screen as well. So we do have a couple of extra minutes. If anyone has any general questions about how did we get to where we are, what the process has looked like, what it will look like, what happens next, and how to stay involved. Feel free to either drop that in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and I will relay it to the team. So we can give it a couple of minutes. we will be posting the slides from the presentation as well as the video itself of the presentation. And Natalia, can we also post to the website the drone video, the overhead
Yes.
view of the park, so that we can?
Yep.
Awesome.
Yes, we got.
Cool. Question, can we put the link in the chat? Yes, I will do that. All right, we have a question from Kathy, who asks, since Jackson Street is not in Freedom Park, why was it listed in the priorities list? Natalia or Scott, you want to?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think, there's a couple of areas that were listed as priorities for different sets of criteria. And certainly, with the funding, how the funding comes in will be a large part of what sort of takes precedent and sort of what Freedom Park Conservancy can actually act on. But I think what we're trying to do for this master plan is identify things that are both within the park and or adjacent to the park, or may take partnership with other entities that directly affect the experience of the park and generally. So we would consider Jackson Street just by proximity as an important functional aspect of relationship to the park, even though it may not be proper.
The site of Jackson Street is synergistic for Freedom Park because of the captive audience that comes to visit it. And we would like to funnel some of that audience to the King Center as well as to Freedom Park Trail. And that is a contiguous theme that you'll see throughout the master plan, where we're trying to capitalize on those synergistic adjacencies, in each one of the neighborhoods, including Martha Stop, for example. And so it'll take a conversation with those partners to see how we can create an interface that creates success for both adjacent projects.
Thank you. We also had a comment about the name of John Lewis. It's John Lewis Freedom Parkway. I think that the freedom might have been missing on one of the graphics, so we'll definitely update that.
Yes.
Amy's, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Amy's asked, when will the final plan be presented?
Like I mentioned, the development of kind of the final master plan will take place over the month of January into February. At the beginning of February, we'll be finalizing public input phase of the project and bringing the whole thing together. The idea is that eventually, probably in late winter, we'll be presenting to the city of Atlanta, for adoption. So, based on kind of that, that's roughly the time frame we're looking at right now, unless Stephanie and the Conservancy can give us more detail on that.
Yeah, I think we want to make sure that we get to a place where we all feel good about it. So it's important that these next steps that we're talking about, where the community helps us prioritize, we want to get that super clear, and then be presenting it back to everybody in the city sometime January, February. There's not a hard date.
Right.
We've got a question about the idea of a bridge over Moreland. Ruth asks, is it going to be a pedestrian bridge? Could y'all maybe speak to the nature of the ideas you had for a potential bridge over Moreland a little bit?
Sure. So yes, it would be a pedestrian bridge. And again, there's a scenario where there's no bridge, but that because there's a lot of logistics that would still need to be sorted out. Not the least of which is the overhead utilities that run through there. But assuming that could be sorted out, the idea would be that if you're coming from the west to the east towards the park, you'd be on the bike trail, and the bike trail would split a little bit further back in order to slowly get up, and we would need about 17 feet clear of traffic plus the depth of the structure. But anyway, but the main point is that would be accessible. That'd be a 5% slope, so bikes and or wheelchairs, and would have a very comfortable way up and over. And compared with that would be a little bit of regrading. There's some existing trees there that we want to work around, preserve to the extent that we can build up the grade and plant new trees around that sort of transition before you get to Moreland will help to really nestle that structure in the trees, which I think will limit its visual impact. The actual structure itself, we would work again, there's a lot of factors that play into this, but if we could work with steel or something in very neutral, warm colors that sort of recede, kind of like what was shown in the image, and really reduce the scale of the bridge. In other words, its size and visual impact. I think we want it to be a very quiet bridge and very deferential to the surrounding community visually. And then after it crosses over, it lands, but the land behind it and the hill is rising up. So you kind of make the bridge becomes a little bit shorter than it would otherwise be, and can meet the grade of the natural grade of the hillside. But similarly, we would plant some existing or some trees around that area, in addition to the existing trees, to again have the bridge sort of move into this sort of veil of trees, again, to limit its visual impact, but also create the beginnings of what is that sort of south leg of the bike, a new bike path, hike and bike path that would occupy the south leg of that big hill area at Moreland, or what we're calling Freedom Commons.
And I'll add to that, just because it specifically asks pedestrian, when we say it's a pedestrian bridge, I think we also anticipate bicycle traffic in terms of we've heard a lot of concerns from parents specifically about a safe route for children biking. So that would be studied further. If this project keeps going, then that would have to be studied to see what's the optimal width to accommodate bikes and pedestrians.
That's right. And there, I should also note there was a comment, I think, also about concern about deactivating the street. In other words, bringing people over there might make the Moreland Street have less of an opportunity for people on bikes and pedestrians to feel like they're part of something. So we talked also about potentially integrating even like a very delicate stair connection that might on the north side bring you direct access down to that plaza space we'd mentioned that's built in association.
I think the idea of a bridge is not mutually exclusive with the idea of improvements to pedestrian intersection. I think those would need to take place either in a staged way or simultaneous way to address both levels.
Yeah.
All right, if we got any final questions or comments? Thank you everyone for joining us. We will be posting the video of the presentation as well as the slides and the awesome drone video as well of Freedom Park to our website. And wish you all a safe and happy holidays. Hope everyone stays safe, and check back frequently for new ways to participate. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.